The woman's scream cut through the desert air like a blade through silk. Caleb Turner's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup as chains rattled across the auction platform, and for a moment, just one terrible moment, he was 15 years old again, dying of thirst under a merciless sun, watching vultures circle overhead. But that was 20 years ago. Today, he was a rancher with money in his pockets and blood on his conscience, standing in a marketplace that reeked of sweat, livestock, and something far worse, human desperation. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd. "Prime specimen, gentlemen. Strong hands, good teeth. Won't give you trouble once she's broken in proper." Caleb turned to leave. He'd come for horses, not horrors. But then she fought back. The woman on that platform twisted against her captors with such fury that her sleeve tore clean down the shoulder, and that's when Caleb saw it. The tattoo. A sun with 7 rays intertwined with a serpent, black ink against brown skin, and suddenly the marketplace disappeared, replaced by a memory so vivid, he could taste the sand in his mouth. 20 years ago, that same symbol had been burned into a leather water pouch pressed against his cracked lips. 20 years ago, a native man named Chayton had found a half-dead white boy in the Sonoran desert and had done what no one else would have. He'd saved him. And standing beside Chayton that day had been a little girl with curious eyes and that same tattoo, small and fresh on her tiny shoulder. His daughter, Ayita. Now here she stood, grown and broken, about to be sold like cattle. The bidding started at $50. Some rancher in a stained hat called out $75. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. How does a man measure the weight of a life saved? How does he calculate the debt of 20 years of breathing, of living, of prospering, while the family who saved him suffered fates he'd been too comfortable to imagine? The answer came to him with brutal clarity. You can't, but you can try. $500! His voice cracked like thunder across the square, and every head turned. The auctioneer's gavel stopped mid-swing. $500 wasn't horse trading money. It was land money. It was legacy money. "Sir, the bid is currently at $75. I said 500, and I meant it." Caleb pushed through the crowd, pulling banknotes from his vest, his saddlebag, anywhere he could find them. His hands shook as he signed over a horse deed, emptied his pockets of every coin. The crowd murmured, some in shock, others in disgust. A white man spending a fortune to buy a native woman. The implications hung thick in the air, ugly and immediate. But Caleb didn't care what they thought. He knew what they didn't, that the true cost of this moment had been accruing interest for 2 decades, and today, finally, the bill had come due. "Everything I have," he said, meeting the auctioneer's eyes. "Everything." The gavel fell with a sound like a coffin closing, or opening. Caleb approached the platform, and Ayita, if that's truly who she was, recoiled as if he'd struck her. Her eyes held nothing but contempt, and why wouldn't they? She saw just another white man with money, another purchaser, another owner. When he reached for her chains, she spat at his feet. "Don't you dare touch me with those hands," she hissed. "I know what men like you want." The words cut deeper than any blade, but Caleb understood. Trust, once shattered, leaves shards embedded in the soul. He unlocked her chains with trembling fingers, and as they fell away, he did something the crowd didn't expect. He stepped back, gave her space, gave her choice. "Your father," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "was named Chayton. He had a scar above his left eye from a childhood accident. He sang when he worked, songs in a language I didn't understand, but somehow felt in my bones. And he wore this. Caleb unbuttoned his shirt collar, revealing a small brand scar on his chest. The sun and serpent, crude and faded, but unmistakable. He marked me before he sent me home. Said it meant I was under his family's protection, that I owed a debt that could never be repaid, only honored. Ayita's face transformed. The hardness cracked, and beneath it was something far more devastating. Recognition. Her knees buckled, and Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she gripped his shirt with both fists and released a sound that wasn't quite crying, wasn't quite screaming. It was the sound of a soul breaking open. "He talked about you," she sobbed into his chest. "The yellow-haired boy who promised to honor our ways. He said you had a good heart. He died believing it. He died believing you became a good man." Her voice fractured on the last word, and Caleb felt his own tears falling into her dark hair. "I tried," he whispered. "God forgive me. I tried. But I should have come back. I should have." "He wouldn't blame you," she said, pulling back to look at him. Her eyes were red, raw, but something else flickered there now, a fragile, dangerous thing called hope. "But I do. I blame everyone. I blame the soldiers who came. I blame the laws that made me property. I blame God for taking my father and leaving me in this hell." She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "And I blame you for waiting 20 years to find me." The crowd had grown silent, watching this strange scene unfold. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, if you're finished with your purchase, we need to clear the platform." "Purchase." The word landed between them like a stone. Caleb gently took Ayita's hands in his and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not a purchase. She's free, and anyone who says different answers to me." As he led her away from that platform, away from the stares and whispers, Caleb felt the weight of his debt shift. It didn't disappear. Debts like this never do, but it transformed into something else, something that felt almost like purpose. But what neither of them knew as they walked toward his horse was that freedom is just another word for visible. And in the shadows at the edge of the marketplace, someone was watching. Someone who recognized that tattoo just as clearly as Caleb had. Someone who'd been searching for Ayita for a very long time. The debt Caleb thought he was repaying, it was about to get a lot more complicated. So here's what I need you to think about. And drop your answer in the comments along with where you're watching from. If you were Caleb, would you have bid everything you owned for a stranger, even one whose family saved your life 20 years ago? Or would you have walked away, convincing yourself that the past is past and debts expire with time? Because here's the thing, Caleb's about to learn that some debts don't just linger. Some of them multiply, and sometimes the life you save comes with a price tag you never saw coming. The ranch house looked smaller than Caleb remembered as he helped Ayita down from his horse, her body still trembling from tears she'd been holding back for what might have been years. He'd built this place with his own hands, timber by timber, thinking it would feel like home someday. Now watching her take in the modest porch, the weathered door, the single window with its cracked pane, he saw it through her eyes. A cage with prettier bars. He handed her the key to the front door, and she stared at it like he'd offered her a snake. "What's this?" Her voice was hoarse, suspicious. "The only key that exists," Caleb said. "The door locks from the inside. I'll be in the barn." He turned to leave, but her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Why?" The question held a universe of distrust. Men don't spend fortunes on women and then sleep in barns. Caleb met her eyes. Those dark pools that had seen too much, survived too much. Your father gave me water when I was dying. He didn't ask for payment. He didn't ask for anything except that I become a good man. He gently removed her hand from his wrist. Good men don't demand gratitude. They don't collect debts from the innocent. They just try to do right, even when it costs them everything. He walked toward the barn, and behind him, he heard the door close. Then, after a long moment, the lock clicked into place. It was the most hopeful sound he'd heard in years. 3 days passed like a held breath. Ayita didn't speak, didn't emerge except to use the outhouse. Caleb left food on the porch, stew, bread, coffee, and watched from the barn as she would crack the door, scan the property like a hunted animal, then snatch the plates inside. On the third night, he found all the dishes, stacked neatly by the door, washed clean. A small gesture, a crack in the armor. The fourth morning changed everything. Caleb was mending the fence on the east pasture, his hands working the wire with practiced efficiency, when he felt her presence before he saw her. She stood 10 feet away, wrapped in a blanket despite the desert heat, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "My father talked about you," she said, and her voice carried across the space between them, like a bridge being built one word at a time. "The boy with yellow hair who made him laugh. He said you had questions about everything. Why the sun set, why the coyotes sang, why the desert bloomed after rain. He said you had a good heart, even though you'd been raised by hard people." She moved closer, just 2 steps, but it felt like miles. "He died believing you became a good man." Caleb's hands stilled on the wire. "I should have come back. I should have found you all. It made sure you were a child. 15, maybe 16. Her eyes narrowed, studying him. "He wouldn't blame you for surviving, but I do. I blame everyone." The words came out like confession, like poison being drawn from a wound. "I blame the soldiers who burned our village. I blame the laws that said we weren't human. I blame God for taking my father and leaving me here, alone, to face things no one should face." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And I blame you for living well while we suffered, for forgetting us." The accusation hit harder than any fist. Caleb wanted to defend himself, to explain that he'd thought about them often, that guilt had been his constant companion, but the truth was simpler and uglier. He had lived well, he had prospered, and he'd done nothing about it until chance, or fate, had put Ayita on that auction block. "You're right," he said. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "I didn't say I wouldn't give it," Ayita replied. "I just need you to understand what it costs." That night, the screaming started. Caleb jolted awake in the barn to the sound of Ayita's terror piercing the darkness. He ran to the house, burst through the unlocked door. When had she unlocked it? And found her in the corner of the bedroom, knees drawn up, eyes wide and unseeing. She was back in whatever hell she'd escaped from, reliving horrors he could only imagine. "Ayita!" He approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "You're safe. You're here. You're safe." She swung at him, catching his jaw with surprising force. He didn't fight back, just absorbed the blow and kept talking, kept repeating the words like a prayer. "You're safe. I promise. You're safe." Finally, recognition flickered in her eyes. She gasped, pulled back, horror replacing the terror. "I hit you. It's nothing." Blood trickled from his split lip, but he smiled anyway. "My fault for bursting in." Something shifted in her expression then, some calculation being made. "Stay," she whispered, "not in here, but outside the door, so I can hear you breathe." So he sat in the hallway, his back against her door, and talked. He told her about the ranch, about the horses he'd raised, about the time a rattlesnake got in the kitchen and he'd nearly shot himself in the foot trying to kill it. He told her stupid stories, meaningless stories, anything to fill the silence with something other than her demons. And slowly, gradually, her breathing evened out. She slept, and Caleb kept talking, just in case she woke again. This became their ritual. Days she would help with small tasks, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, moving through the property like a ghost, learning to be solid again. Nights he would sit outside her door until sleep claimed them both. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to, but the outside world wasn't content to let them heal in peace. 2 weeks after he'd brought her home, the sheriff arrived with news that made Caleb's blood run cold. Mason, the man who'd originally owned Ayita, was challenging the sale, claiming fraud, claiming theft. "He's got lawyers, Caleb," Sheriff Briggs said, his weathered face grave. "Good ones, federal types. They're saying you coerced the auctioneer, that the sale wasn't legitimate." "I paid fair price, more than fair." "That's the problem." Briggs lowered his voice. "Nobody pays that much unless they've got ulterior motives. They're painting you as, well, they're painting a picture that ain't pretty." Ayita appeared in the doorway then, and both men fell silent. She understood immediately. "They want me back, over my dead body," Caleb said, and meant it. "That can be arranged," came a voice from behind the sheriff. 3 men materialized from the dust, hired guns with dead eyes and itchy trigger fingers. The leader stepped forward, showing a court document with official seals. "We're here to retrieve Mason's property. Step aside, Turner, and nobody gets hurt." Caleb's hand moved to his hip, but Ayita was faster. She stepped in front of him, her voice steady despite the fear. Caleb could see trembling through her frame. "I am not property. I am Ayita, daughter of Chayton, and I will die before I go back. That can be arranged, too," the hired gun said, his hand drifting toward his weapon. What happened next was instinct, not bravery. Caleb shoved Ayita behind him and swung hard, catching the first man in the jaw. The fight that followed was brutal and brief. 3 against 1 were odds that mathematics favored. They beat him down into the dust, ribs cracking, blood filling his mouth, but he kept getting up, kept putting himself between them and Ayita. Finally, Sheriff Briggs fired a shot into the air. "Enough. This ain't legal, and you boys know it. The court date is set for next month. Until then, she stays here." The hired guns retreated, but their leader paused, looking directly at Ayita. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. Savage, Mason don't forget what's his." When they were gone, Ayita dropped to her knees beside Caleb's broken body. Her hands trembled as she touched his face. His bleeding nose, his already swelling eye. "You could have died," she whispered. "Why would you do that? Why?" Caleb coughed, tasted copper. "Your father died for me. That's easy math." "That's insane math," she corrected. But there were tears on her cheeks now. "You don't owe me this. You don't owe me your life." "Maybe not," he admitted, letting her help him to his feet. "But maybe I'm not doing it because I owe you. Maybe I'm doing it because I want to." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither was ready to fully acknowledge. That night, after she'd bandaged his wounds and forced him to drink willow bark tea, after he'd insisted on still sitting outside her door despite his broken ribs, Ayita did something unexpected. She opened the door and sat beside him in the hallway, their shoulders barely touching. "Tell me about him," she said quietly. "My father. Tell me what you remember." So Caleb talked, painting pictures with words of a man who'd shown mercy in a merciless land, who'd sung while working, who'd treated a dying white boy like he was worth saving. And as he talked, Ayita's head, slowly, inevitably, came to rest on his shoulder. Neither of them pulled away. They fell asleep like that. Two broken people learning how to be whole, unaware that in the darkness beyond the ranch, torches were being lit. Mason was done with legal proceedings. He was coming for what he believed was his, and he was bringing an army to collect it. The question wasn't whether violence would come to Caleb's door. The question was whether love would be enough to survive it. The question that kept Caleb awake that final night wasn't whether Mason would come. It was whether he'd have the strength to do what needed doing when he did. His ribs screamed with every breath. His face was a canvas of purple and yellow bruises. But pain was just noise. Fear was the real enemy, and fear had a specific shape, the image of Ayita being dragged back into chains while he lay dying in the dirt, too broken to stop it. He was loading his rifle when her hand covered his. "If this goes wrong," she said, her voice steady in a way that terrified him more than any threat, "I won't let them take me alive." The knife in her other hand caught the lamplight, and Caleb understood with brutal clarity that she meant every word. How do you argue with someone who's already died 1,000 times in their own mind? How do you convince them that survival is worth the risk when they've learned that survival sometimes costs more than death? "You're not dying," he said, gripping her hand until she looked at him. "Neither of us are. I didn't pull you off that auction block, just to bury you on this property." "Then what's the plan, Caleb? Because hope isn't a strategy, and love." She stopped, the word hanging between them like a confession neither had meant to make. "Love doesn't stop bullets." Before he could answer, the sound of hooves rumbled through the night, like distant thunder rolling closer. Caleb moved to the window and counted 12 torches, maybe more, spreading out to surround the house. Mason's voice boomed across the property, thick with entitlement and rage. "Caleb Turner, you're harboring stolen property and you assaulted my men. Come out and face justice, or we'll burn you out like the criminal you are." "Stolen property?" The words made Caleb's jaw clench so hard, he thought his teeth might crack. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed down. A gesture that said he was willing to talk, but not willing to surrender. The torchlight painted Mason's face in hellish orange, making him look like exactly what he was. A demon dressed in expensive clothes. "Mason, this is between you and me. Let's settle it like men." Mason's laugh was ugly, theatrical. "You made it between us when you stole what's mine. That native woman represents a significant investment, and I intend to collect. She's not an investment. She's not property." Caleb's voice carried across the darkness, and he made sure every word landed like a hammer. "She's a human being, and she's free. Not according to the law, she ain't." Mason gestured to his men, who began to close in, a noose of torches and guns tightening around the house. "Now I'll make you one final deal, Turner, because despite everything, I'm a reasonable man. Sign over your ranch, every acre, every building, every head of livestock, and I'll let you walk away with your life. The woman stays." Caleb looked back through the doorway where Ayita stood, knife in hand, prepared to die rather than return to bondage, and in her face he saw her father, Chayton, who'd given water to a dying boy and asked nothing in return except that the boy become good. This was the test, then. This was the moment when Caleb would discover if he'd spent 20 years becoming the man Chayton had believed he could be, or if he'd just been playing pretend. "No deal," Caleb said, and raised his rifle. Mason's men lifted their torches, preparing to throw, and for one terrible moment, Caleb thought he'd just signed both their death warrants. But then a gunshot cracked through the night. Not from Mason's men, from behind them. The shot went high, deliberate, a warning, not a killing blow, and every head turned to see Sheriff Briggs riding in hard with another man beside him. A man wearing a federal marshal's badge that caught the torchlight like a small sun. "Hold your fire, all of you!" Briggs shouted, pulling his horse between Mason and the house. "This stops now!" The federal marshal dismounted, with the kind of calm that only comes from a man who's seen every kind of violence and survived it all. He pulled a document from his coat, unfolded it with deliberate slowness, and read, in a voice that carried authority like some men carry weapons. "By order of the territorial governor and under the authority vested in me by the federal government, I hereby declare that Ayita, daughter of Chaitin of the Kainai people, is recognized as a free citizen of these United States, with all rights and protections therein." He looked directly at Mason. "Any attempt to detain, harm, or otherwise interfere with her liberty will be considered a federal offense, punishable by imprisonment." The silence that followed was so complete that Caleb could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Ayita's sharp intake of breath behind him, could hear Mason's teeth grinding together in impotent fury. But it was Mason who finally spoke, his voice dripping venom. "Who petitioned for this writ? Who had the connections to reach the territorial governor?" The marshal gestured toward Caleb. "Mr. Turner submitted a formal petition 3 weeks ago, along with documented evidence of Miss Ayita's heritage, her unlawful enslavement, and a rather compelling personal testimony about a debt of honor. Took some time to process, but justice, gentlemen, may move slow, but it arrives nonetheless." Caleb's knees nearly buckled. 3 weeks ago. The day after he'd brought Ayita home, while she'd been locked in the house refusing to speak. He'd ridden to town and written that letter by candlelight, pouring every detail he could remember onto paper. Chaitin's kindness, the family marking, the injustice of a good man's daughter being sold like livestock. He'd sent it off with little hope, just desperate action. The only thing he could think to do besides stand guard with a rifle. He hadn't told Ayita because he hadn't wanted to give her hope that might shatter. She emerged from the house now, moving past him on the porch, her eyes locked on his face with an expression he couldn't name. "You did this?" Her voice broke. "You fought for my freedom before you even knew if I'd forgive you." "I wasn't looking for forgiveness," Caleb said quietly. "I was looking for what's right." Mason, realizing he'd lost, made one final play. "This isn't over, Turner. I've got lawyers, connections. We'll appeal, we'll fight this federal overreach, and when we win, and we will win, I'll come back for what's mine." "Then you'll die trying," Ayita said, and there was something in her voice that made even the hired guns step back. "Because I am not yours. I am not anyone's, and any man who tries to put chains on me again will find out what my father's daughter is truly capable of." Mason and his men retreated into the darkness, their torches fading like dying stars, and for the first time since the auction, Caleb allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd survived this. The marshal tipped his hat, promised to file the necessary paperwork, and rode off with Sheriff Briggs, leaving Caleb and Ayita alone on the porch as dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and amber. "My father saved your life once," Ayita said, stepping close enough that Caleb could feel her warmth. "You've saved mine twice now." "Then we're even," Caleb replied. "No." She took his hand, threaded her fingers through his. "We're just beginning." They stood there as the sun rose. Two people who'd been broken by the world and somehow found a way to piece each other back together. Caleb felt the weight that had lived in his chest for 20 years finally, blessedly, begin to lift. But freedom, as Ayita had learned and Caleb was about to discover, is never as simple as a piece of paper or a marshal's declaration. 3 days of peace passed. 3 days where they laughed, where they planned a future, where Caleb taught her to ride his gentlest horse, and she taught him words from her father's language that he'd forgotten. 3 days of believing the hardest part was over. Then the stranger arrived. He rode in at noon, a well-dressed native man with eyes like winter ice and movements that spoke of careful control. He dismounted, with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. And when he looked at Ayita, something in his expression made Caleb's hand drift toward his rifle. "I am Napaishni," the man said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "Your mother's brother." Ayita went pale as desert bone. "My mother had no brothers. She was an only child. My father told me." "Your father," Napaishni interrupted gently, "told you many things that weren't true. Your mother's family is very much alive, Ayita, and we've been searching for you for a very, very long time." He pulled a pendant from his coat, silver and turquoise, shaped like the sun and serpent of Ayita's tattoo, but more ornate, more expensive, the kind of thing that spoke of wealth and power. "You're coming home, niece, to your real home, where you belong." Caleb stepped forward, every instinct screaming danger. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go." Napaishni's smile didn't reach his eyes. How noble, white man, truly. "But tell me, do you know what that mark on her shoulder really means? Because it's not just a family symbol." He leaned in, close enough that Caleb could smell sage and tobacco. "It's a blood oath, and the debt your freedom created." He looked at Ayita, and his smile turned sharp. "She's been paying it her whole life." Ayita's voice came out strangled. "No, Papa wouldn't. He couldn't." "Your papa had no choice," Napaishni said, and now the gentleness was gone, replaced by something cold and absolute. "The water he gave this white boy, it belonged to our tribe, sacred water from our sacred spring, and the price for sharing it with an outsider, according to our oldest laws, was blood debt. Your father knew the cost. He paid it the only way he could." Caleb's world tilted sideways. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the debt was never yours to repay, Mr. Turner." Napaishni mounted his horse, looking down at them both like a judge delivering sentence. "The day Chaitan saved your life, he promised his daughter to our tribe as payment. She was marked, sealed, and sworn before she could even walk. Every day she's lived since then, every breath, every heartbeat," he pointed at Caleb, "was bought with her freedom." Ayita's knees buckled. Caleb caught her, but she felt like dead weight in his arms, her eyes unfocused, her breathing rapid and shallow. "You're lying," Caleb said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" Napaishni turned his horse to leave, then paused. 3 days, niece. I'll return in 3 days for you to come willingly, or I'll take you by force. Either way, the debt will be settled. Either way, you'll fulfill the oath your father made." He looked at Caleb one last time. "You wanted to repay what you owed, then let her go. Because the cost of your life was hers, and every day you keep her here, you're stealing time that doesn't belong to you." He rode away, leaving silence and devastation in his wake. Ayita pushed away from Caleb, stumbling backward, and when she looked at him, her eyes held something worse than anger, worse than betrayal. They held the death of hope. "Was my entire life just payment for yours?" she whispered. "Was everything? My father's love, his teachings, his sacrifice. Was it all just debt collection? And Caleb, standing in the wreckage of everything they'd built, had no answer that wouldn't sound like another lie. If you need to know what happens next, if you need to discover whether Napeshni is telling the truth, whether Ayita's father really traded his daughter's future for a white boy's life, and whether love can survive when it's built on a foundation of debt and blood, then hit that subscribe button right now. This story isn't over.